Hello everyone. Before the story start, tell me where are you watching from and what time is it?
The walk had become habit, the kind of habit that replaces thought. Every evening, after the late shift at the copy shop, I took the same route home. 7 blocks east, turn left at the old bakery, 4 blocks north, turn right at the church, then the long straight stretch past the shuttered warehouses to my building. I could do it in my sleep, and often felt like I was. The city at that hour was a study in repetition, the same flickering streetlights, the same dark windows, the same cracked pavement under the same tired feet. Tonight was no different. The shift had been the same. The walk had been the same. I reached the corner where the bakery used to be, the one that had closed 3 years ago and still had the same faded sign hanging over the same empty windows. I turned left. 4 blocks north. I counted them, as I always did. 1, 2, 3, 4. The church was not there. I stopped. I looked around. The street was the same street, the same row of brownstones, the same ginkgo trees, the same pattern of cracked pavement. But the corner where the church should have been, the corner where I had turned right every night for 7 years, was empty. Not a vacant lot where the church had been demolished, just empty. As if the church had never existed. As if the corner itself had been erased from the city's memory. I walked to where the church should have been. The sidewalk continued, uninterrupted. The street continued, uninterrupted. The buildings on either side continued, their facades seamlessly meeting at a corner that had no church, no gap, no evidence that anything had ever been there. I turned right anyway, out of habit, out of desperation, and walked 4 blocks north. The street was the same street. The buildings were the same buildings. But nothing was familiar. I reached the corner where my apartment building should have been. It was not there. The street continued, straight and indifferent, lined with buildings I did not recognize, leading to a horizon I had never seen. I stood at the corner, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts, and I understood. The city had not ended. The street had not ended. I had simply reached a point where the map I carried in my head no longer matched the territory. I turned back. I retraced my steps to the corner where the church should have been. It was still not there. I walked further, past the bakery that was not there, past the blocks I had counted 1,000 times, past the landmarks that had dissolved into the smooth, featureless continuity of a city that no longer recognized my route. The street continued. It always continued. There was no end to it, no destination, no home waiting at the end of the familiar path. There was only this, the street, the walking, the endless, indifferent continuation. I have been walking for days now. Or weeks. Or hours. Time has lost its meaning in this city that never ends. The streetlights flicker on and off in patterns I cannot predict. The buildings repeat, their facades familiar but not quite right, like photographs of places I have never been. The corners come and go, each one offering the same choice, left, right, straight. None of them lead home. None of them lead anywhere. They just continue. I reached the corner. The street continued anyway. And I am still walking. The bus stop was a landmark of absence. For 40 years, it had marked the corner where the 7A picked up students for the high school, where commuters gathered in the gray mornings, where old Mrs. Henderson had sat every Tuesday at noon, waiting for a bus that never came because her mind had already left for destinations the route didn't serve. The sign had been there as long as anyone could remember, a green metal rectangle, its white lettering faded to a ghost of legibility, bolted to a post that had weathered decades of rain and snow and the casual graffiti of teenagers with nothing better to do. Then, one Tuesday, it was gone. Not removed, there was no fresh concrete, no scar in the pavement where the post had been uprooted. Just absent. The post remained, a gray metal cylinder rising from the sidewalk, but the sign that should have crowned it was simply not there. No empty bolt holes, no bracket waiting for replacement. The post was smooth, seamless, as if it had never held anything at all. I noticed it on my way to work. I noticed it because she was standing there. A woman, middle-aged, dressed in a coat that might have been fashionable 20 years ago, her hands clasped in front of her, her gaze fixed on the empty top of the post. She was waiting. Not impatiently, not anxiously. Just waiting, with the patient stillness of someone who has learned that time is not the enemy it appears to be. I slowed my pace. I should have kept walking. The city is full of people doing inexplicable things, and the wise pedestrian learns to look past them. But something about her stillness, her focus on that empty post, held me. I stopped at the corner, pretending to check my phone, and watched. She did not move. The minutes passed. The 7A bus arrived, paused, departed. She did not glance at it. Her eyes never left the top of the post. She was waiting for something else. Something that had nothing to do with transportation. I approached her. It was a foolish thing to do, a violation of the city's unwritten code of non-involvement. But the pull was too strong. I stood beside her, following her gaze to the empty post. Up close, I could see that the metal was old, its surface pitted with rust, its gray the gray of decades. It had held something once. It must have. But there was no evidence of what. "What are you waiting for?" I asked. She did not look at me. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, distant, the voice of someone speaking from a great depth. "The sign," she said. "It was here. I saw it. I read it. It told me where to go. And then it was gone." I looked at the post again. "There's no sign," I said. "There's no bracket. It never held a sign." She turned to me then, and her eyes were the pale gray of winter sky, and they held a sadness so deep it seemed to have no bottom. "That's what everyone says. That's what the city says. But I saw it. I read it. It told me to wait here. So I wait." I wanted to argue. I wanted to point out the obvious, the physical impossibility, the evidence of the seamless post. But something stopped me. Something in the way she said, "The city says." As if the city were a voice, a presence, a force that could erase things and then deny they had ever existed. I left her there. I went to work. I came home. She was still there, in the same position, her gaze fixed on the empty post. The next day, the same. The day after, the same. She became a fixture of the corner, as invisible in her way as the missing sign. People walked past without seeing her. Buses came and went. The city hummed its indifferent hum. I started bringing her coffee. She accepted it without thanks, without acknowledgement, her eyes never leaving the post. Sometimes I stood with her for a few minutes, sharing her vigil. She never spoke of anything but the sign. She never asked about me. She was entirely, completely absorbed in the act of waiting. Weeks passed. The seasons shifted. The coat she wore was no longer appropriate for the weather, but she did not change it. She did not seem to notice the cold, or the heat, or the rain. She simply stood, and waited, and watched the empty post. One evening, as the light was fading and the streetlights began their slow flicker into life, I asked her the question that had been forming in my mind since the first day. What did the sign say? The one that was there. She was silent for a long time. The streetlight above us hummed its low, electric drone. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across her face, illuminating the lines that had deepened during her vigil. Finally, she spoke. It said, "Here. Just, here. Nothing else. No route number, no destination, no schedule. Just, here." And I understood. This was the place. The only place I needed to be. So I waited. And then it was gone. Here, I repeated. The word hung in the air between us, simple and profound. Here. This corner. This post. This moment. She had been told, by a sign that no longer existed, that here was enough. That waiting was enough. That being present, fully present, in this one spot, was the destination she had been seeking all along. I looked at the post. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw it, a faint green rectangle, hovering in the air above the metal, its white letters glowing with a soft, internal light. Here. Then it was gone, and there was only the post, seamless and empty, holding nothing but the weight of her waiting. I do not know how long she stood there. I stopped going to that corner after a while. The city is full of such places, such people, such moments of impossible patience. But sometimes, in the gray hours between sleep and waking, I think of her. She waited where the sign should have been. And the post held nothing. But she held everything. The first time I noticed it, I was walking home from the late shift, my mind blank with exhaustion. I passed the old warehouse on 14th, the one with the faded advertisement for soap painted on its brick wall. A block later, I passed it again. The same warehouse. The same faded soap advertisement. The same crack in the pavement at its base where a weed had pushed through. I stopped. I turned around. The street behind me was empty, the same row of buildings, the same pattern of light and shadow. I walked back the way I had come. The warehouse was there, exactly as I had seen it. But the street beyond it was not the street I had just walked. It was the same street, the same buildings, as if I had stepped into a loop without realizing it. I walked forward again. The warehouse appeared. I walked past it. The next block was the same as the last. The same brownstones, the same ginkgo trees, the same pattern of cracks in the pavement. I walked faster. The buildings repeated. The street repeated. The city stuttered. I broke into a run. My footsteps echoed in the empty night, a frantic percussion against the indifferent facades. The warehouse appeared again. And again. And again. Each time I passed it, the street ahead was the same as the street behind, the buildings repeating in an endless, stuttering loop. I stopped running. I leaned against the warehouse wall, my breath ragged, my heart hammering against my ribs. The brick was cold, real, solid beneath my palms. The city was not a dream. It was not a hallucination. It was a stutter. A catch in the rhythm of the world. A repetition that should not exist. I looked up at the sky. The clouds were the same clouds I had seen an hour ago, their shapes unchanged, their positions fixed. The streetlights flickered in the same pattern, on off on, a cycle that never varied. The city had frozen in a loop, and I was trapped within it. I started walking again, but slowly now, deliberately. I counted my steps. I counted the buildings. I counted the cracks in the pavement. The numbers were always the same. The city had become a record skipping on the same groove, playing the same fragment of itself over and over. I do not know how long I walked. Hours. Days. The loop had no end, no variation, no escape. I passed the warehouse 1,000 times. I passed the brownstones 1,000 times. I passed the ginkgo trees, their leaves forever still, forever caught in the moment before they fell. Then, one day, or one night, or one moment, I noticed a change. A small change, almost imperceptible. The crack in the pavement at the base of the warehouse wall was slightly wider than it had been. A tiny difference, a single pixel of variation in the endless repetition. The city was breathing again. The stutter was beginning to resolve. I kept walking. The changes accumulated. A leaf on the ginkgo tree shifted position. A streetlight flickered at a slightly different interval. The buildings, once identical, began to show subtle variations, a different shade of brick, a different pattern of windows, a different crack in their facades. The loop was breaking. The city was learning to speak again. I reached a corner I had never seen before. The street beyond was new, unfamiliar, stretching into a horizon that promised something other than repetition. I turned and looked back. The warehouse was there, the brownstones, the ginkgo trees, all of them, but different now. Varied. Alive. The stutter had become a sentence, a narrative, a city that could breathe and change and move forward. I stepped onto the new street. The city unfolded before me, infinite and various, its buildings no longer repeating but evolving, each one unique, each one a new word in a story that would never end. The stutter was over. The breath had returned. And I, who had walked through the loop 1,000 times, was finally free to walk on. The counting started as a way to manage the anxiety. If I knew exactly how many steps it would take to get from my door to the bus stop, from the bus stop to my office, from my office to the coffee shop and back, then the world felt smaller, more manageable, less likely to spring surprises. I counted everything. The number of tiles in my bathroom. The number of seconds the traffic light stayed red. The number of breaths between one thought and the next. Numbers were anchors in the chaos of a mind that refused to settle. At first, it worked. The counting gave me something to focus on, a rhythm to match my footsteps to, a predictable pattern in an unpredictable world. But then the numbers began to change. It started on a Tuesday, on my walk to the bus stop. I had made this walk 1,000 times, and I knew exactly how many steps it took. 412 from my door to the corner. I started counting, as I always did. 1, 2, 3. At the corner, I stopped. My count said 387. I was 25 steps short. I looked back at my door. It was the same distance. The same sidewalk. The same buildings. But the number had shrunk. I told myself I had miscounted. I started over, walking back to my door and then forward again, counting carefully, deliberately. 387. The same number. The distance had not changed. The number had. The next day, it was 362. The day after, 341. Each time I walked the route, the number of steps it took to cover the same ground grew smaller. The distance was not changing. The steps were. They were somehow larger, covering more ground with each stride, even though I was walking the same way I always had. The numbers were shrinking, and with them, the world was compressing. I started counting everything. The number of steps from my desk to the water cooler. From the water cooler to the break room. From my apartment door to the bathroom. Every number came back smaller than the day before. The numbers were not lying. They were telling me something. The world was contracting. The distances between things were not changing, but the number of steps it took to cross them was shrinking. I was covering more ground with each stride, even though my stride had not changed. Or perhaps the ground itself was changing. Perhaps the city was folding in on itself, its streets compressing, its blocks shortening, its distances collapsing into smaller and smaller units. The numbers were the only evidence, the only clue that something fundamental had shifted. I stopped going out. I stayed in my apartment, counting the steps from my bed to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the bathroom, from the bathroom to the door. Each day, the numbers shrank. My world was becoming smaller, more compact, easier to traverse. The apartment that had once taken 50 steps to cross now took 30. Then 20. Then 10. I am sitting on my bed now. The kitchen is 3 steps away. The bathroom is 2. The door is 1. Tomorrow, I will not need to count. Tomorrow, the numbers will have shrunk to 0. The distances will have collapsed completely. I will be everywhere at once, or nowhere at all. I do not know which is more terrifying. I count my steps. Each number comes back smaller. And I am learning, slowly, that the only distance that matters is the one between where I am and where I am going. When that distance becomes 0, I will have arrived. And I will never need to count again. I met her on a night when time had lost its meaning. The insomnia had been bad, the kind where the hours stretch like taffy and the clock on the nightstand seems to mock you with its slow, deliberate progress. I had given up on sleep around 3 and gone for a walk, the city's empty streets offering the only comfort I could find. The rhythm of my footsteps was the only rhythm I could trust. She fell into step beside me at the corner of 5th and Grand. I did not hear her approach. She was simply there, walking at my pace, her footsteps silent on the pavement. I glanced at her, a woman in a dark coat, her face shadowed, her gaze fixed straight ahead. I did not speak. She did not speak. We walked. Her rhythm was wrong. That was the first thing I noticed, after the initial shock of her presence. My footsteps were steady, a regular beat like a metronome. 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. Hers were off. Not faster, not slower, but uneven. A pause where there should have been a step. A step where there should have been a pause. It was the rhythm of a clock missing its second hand, the rhythm of time itself faltering. I tried to match her pace, to find the pattern in her steps, but there was none. She walked in a rhythm that made no sense, that followed no logic, that refused to synchronize with anything. And yet we moved together, side by side, as if we had been walking this way forever. After a long time, minutes, hours, I could not tell, she spoke. Her voice was soft, distant, the voice of someone speaking from a great depth. I have been walking for a long time, she said. I have lost count of the steps. I have lost count of the years. I did not ask who she was. I did not ask where she had come from. The questions felt irrelevant, as meaningless as the numbers on a clock that no longer worked. I simply walked beside her, matching her broken rhythm as best I could. The clock stopped, she said. Long ago. I do not know when. I do not know why. But ever since, my steps have been wrong. I cannot find the beat. I cannot find the rhythm. I just keep walking. I looked at her. In the dim light of the street lamp, I could see her face. It was young, or old, or both, the kind of face that holds no age, that exists outside of time. Her eyes were gray, depthless, and in them I saw the reflection of a clock with no hands. I hear it sometimes, she said. The missing second. The pause where the tick should be. It echoes in my head, in my steps, in the spaces between my footsteps. It is the sound of time broken. The sound of a world that has forgotten how to move forward. We walked on. The city passed around us, its buildings indifferent, its streets empty. The rhythm of her steps was a constant reminder of the thing that was missing, the beat that should have been there but was not. I found myself listening for it, waiting for the missing second, the pause that never came. I have been looking for someone to walk with, she said. Someone who could hear the silence between the ticks. Someone who could walk beside me without trying to fix the rhythm. You are the first. I did not know what to say. I did not know if there was anything to say. So I simply walked beside her, my steps finding a new rhythm, not matching hers, but complementing it, filling the spaces where her steps should have been. We walked until the sky began to lighten, a gray pallor seeping into the darkness. At the edge of a park, she stopped. It started in the late afternoon, the kind of golden hour that makes even the ugliest parts of the city look like they belong in a photograph. I was sitting on a bench in the little park near my apartment, watching the light play across the buildings, when I noticed something wrong. My shadow, which should have been stretching eastward as the sun sank in the west, was longer than it should have been. Much longer. It stretched across the grass, across the path, and up the wall of the building opposite, its edges sharp and clear in the golden light. I looked at the sun. It was where it should have been, low in the sky, its light warm and diffuse. I looked at my shadow again. It had grown. In the seconds I had been looking at the sun, it had extended another foot across the grass. The sun had not moved. The shadow had. I stood up, my heart beginning its slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I watched my shadow as it continued to lengthen, its edges creeping across the grass with a slow, inexorable patience. The sun hung motionless in the sky, its position unchanged. The laws of physics had not been suspended. They had been replaced by something else. I looked around the park. A man was walking his dog, his shadow stretching behind him like a dark river, longer than any dog walker's shadow had a right to be. A woman sat on a bench reading, her shadow pooling at her feet and then spreading outward, a dark stain on the concrete. The trees cast shadows that reached across the grass and up the walls, their branches elongated into impossible fingers. The sun did not move. The shadows grew. I walked home, my steps quick, my eyes fixed on the ground. My shadow led the way, stretching out before me, longer and longer with each step. It reached the corner before I did, turning left before I had decided to turn. It was moving ahead of me, anticipating my path, marking a route I had not yet chosen. I reached my building. The shadow was already there, climbing the steps, reaching for the door. I followed it inside. The lobby was dim, lit only by the weak bulb above the mailboxes. My shadow was barely visible in that light, but I could feel it, a presence at my feet, still stretching, still growing, still moving without the sun's permission. I climbed the stairs to my apartment. The windows at the end of the hall let in the golden light, and my shadow stretched before me, up the wall, across the ceiling, into the space beyond the door. I opened the door. The apartment was dark. My shadow was not. It lay across the floor, through the living room, into the bedroom, its edges sharp and clear despite the absence of any light source. It was no longer my shadow. It was something else. Something that had borrowed my shape and was now stretching it into forms I could not recognize. I stood in the doorway, watching it grow. It reached the far wall and did not stop. It climbed the wall, spread across the ceiling, poured through the cracks in the window frame. It was leaving. Leaving me behind, stretching itself into a darkness that had no end. The sun had not moved. But my shadow had. It had grown longer and longer, stretching away from me, stretching out of my life, stretching into a future I would never reach. I stood in the doorway, watching it go, and I understood that some things cannot be held. Some things stretch and stretch until they break, and then they are gone. The shadows grew longer without the sun moving. And I learned, in that endless golden hour, that the only thing darker than a shadow is the moment you realize it no longer needs you to exist. The stone was nothing special. Just a piece of granite I had picked up on a hike years ago, its surface smooth from the river that had carried it, its color a dull, comforting gray. I carried it in my pocket everywhere I went, a talisman, a weight to remind me that some things endure. When the anxiety got bad, would wrap my fingers around it and feel its cool solidity, its refusal to be anything other than what it was. On the night it happened, I was walking home through a part of the city I did not know well. The streets were narrow, the buildings old, the streetlights few and far between. I was lost, not in the dramatic sense, but in the quiet way that happens when you stop paying attention and the world rearranges itself around you. I reached a door, just a door, wooden, weathered, its paint peeling in long, vertical strips, and on impulse, I took the stone from my pocket and placed it on the doorstep. A marker. A sign that I had been here. Something to find on the way back, if I ever found my way back. I walked on. The streets twisted and turned, the buildings repeated themselves, the darkness deepened. I walked for what felt like hours, my footsteps the only sound, my mind empty of everything except the need to keep moving. I reached the next block. And there, on the doorstep of a building that looked exactly like the one I had left, was my stone. I stopped. I stared. The stone was unmistakable, its shape, its color, the small chip on one edge where it had struck another rock in the river. It was mine. And it was here, on this doorstep, waiting for me. I picked it up. It was warm, warmer than it should have been, as if it had been held in a hand for a long time. I looked at the door. It was the same door. The same peeling paint, the same weathered wood, the same worn handle. I had not moved. I had walked for hours and arrived exactly where I had started. I put the stone back on the doorstep. I walked on. The streets twisted and turned. The buildings repeated. The darkness deepened. I reached the next block. The stone was there, waiting. I tried again. And again. Each time, I placed the stone on a doorstep, walked until I thought I had made progress, and found it on the next block, waiting. The stone was not moving. I was. But the city was moving with me, shifting its geometry so that every doorstep was the same doorstep, every block the same block, every moment the same moment. I stopped trying. I sat on the steps of the building, the only building, and held the stone in my hand. It was cool now, patient, waiting for me to understand. I understood. The stone was not a marker. It was a messenger. It was telling me that there is no progress, no forward, no away. There is only here. Only this doorstep, this moment, this hand holding this stone. The city was not a maze. It was a mirror. And every block, every door, every step I took was just another reflection of the same thing. I put the stone in my pocket. I stood. I walked to the next block. The stone was still in my pocket. The doorstep was empty. The city had released me. I walked home, the stone warm against my thigh, its message finally received. I left a stone at a doorstep. I found it on the next block, waiting. And I learned that the only journey that matters is the one that brings you back to where you started, with something to show for it. I saw her first from the window of the coffee shop, a figure in the gray morning light that seemed to belong to a different kind of day. She was standing at the corner, her face lifted to the sky, her arms slightly spread, as if she were measuring something invisible. I watched her for a long time, my coffee growing cold in my hand, waiting for her to move, to do something, to become ordinary. She did not. When I finally left the shop, she was still there, but now her eyes were on me. She smiled. It was not a smile of recognition, not a smile of greeting. It was a smile that said, "I have been waiting for you to notice." I approached her. I do not know why. The city discourages such things, approaching strangers, breaking the bubble of anonymity. But her smile was an invitation I could not refuse. "You feel it too," she said. Not a question. A statement. Feel what? She gestured at the street, the buildings, the sky. The stretch. The way the city is expanding. Not outward. Inward. The spaces between things are getting larger. The pauses between footsteps are getting longer. The city is learning to breathe. I looked around. The street was the same street. The buildings were the same buildings. But she was right. Something had shifted. The distance between the lamppost and the fire hydrant seemed greater than it had been. The silence between the passing cars was deeper, more resonant. The city was stretching, like a sleeper waking from a long nap. "It's been asleep," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "For a long time. Decades. Centuries. Just going through the motions, following the same routines, the same rhythms. But now it's waking up. It's remembering how to move. She smiled again, and this time I saw it, the same stretch in her face, the same expansion. Her smile was wider than it should have been, not in a grotesque way, but in a way that suggested she was learning to occupy more space, to take up more of the world. "Watch," she said. She raised her arm, slowly, deliberately, and pointed at a building across the street. As her arm rose, the building seemed to lean. Just slightly. Just enough to acknowledge her gesture. The windows caught the light differently. The facade seemed to breathe. "The city is learning to stretch," she said. "And when it stretches, it reaches for us. It remembers that we are part of it. That we always have been." She lowered her arm. The building settled back into its ordinary stillness. But the air around us felt different. Lighter. More alive. I walked with her through the city that morning. She showed me the places where the stretch was most pronounced, a crack in the pavement that had widened into a small canyon, a tree whose branches had grown overnight into new configurations, a street that seemed longer than it had been the day before. The city was changing, not in the slow, incremental way of ordinary time, but in the sudden, expansive way of something waking from a long sleep. "It's beautiful," I said, and meant it. She smiled. "It is. And it's just the beginning. The city is learning to stretch. Soon, it will learn to move. And then..." She trailed off, her eyes on the horizon. "And then what?" She turned to me, her smile widening, her face full of light. "And then we will move with it." She left me at the corner of my own street, walking away into the stretched light of the morning. I watched her go, her figure growing smaller not with distance but with the city's slow, breathing expansion. I still see her sometimes, in the corners of my vision, in the moments when the city stretches and breathes. She is always smiling. And I am learning to smile with her. The bus let me off at the edge of town, a place where the pavement cracked and the streetlights stopped their orderly march and the world just sort of frayed into scrubland and gravel. I had been saving for this trip for 2 years, working double shifts at a warehouse that smelled of dust and cardboard, eating rice and beans in my studio apartment while I watched travel documentaries on a laptop with a cracked screen. The destination was simple, a city I had never seen, its skyline a postcard image I kept pinned to the wall above my bed. Glass towers that caught the sunrise, a river that curved through the downtown like a silver thread, a bridge that arced with impossible grace from one bank to the other. I had looked at that photograph every night before sleep for 18 months. It was a promise I made to myself. The walk began in optimism. The road was a 2-lane highway cutting through flat, empty land, the kind of terrain that makes you feel small but not lonely. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue, and the sun was warm on my shoulders. I had a backpack with water, granola bars, a paper map I didn't really need because I could see the skyline already, a jagged silhouette on the horizon, dark against the bright sky. It was distant, sure, but distance is just a number. I calculated 3 hours of steady walking, maybe 4 if I stopped to rest. I could do that. I had done harder things. An hour passed. The road unspooled behind me, a gray ribbon tied to nothing. I drank water, ate a granola bar, adjusted the straps on my backpack. I looked up at the skyline. It looked exactly the same size. Not smaller, not closer, not any different than it had when I stepped off the bus. I shrugged it off. Distance plays tricks in flat landscapes. The air was clear, no haze, no distortion. I kept walking. 2 hours. My legs had found their rhythm, the automatic stride of a long walker. I passed a weathered sign for a diner that had closed a decade ago, its windows boarded, its neon sign a skeleton of rusted tubes. I passed a fence post with a single boot nailed to it, the leather cracked and gray. I passed nothing else. No cars. No birds. Just the road, the sky, and the skyline ahead. I looked at it again. My step faltered. It was the same. Not a little bit closer, not perceptibly larger. The exact same size, the exact same shape, as if I had been walking on a treadmill, as if the road was feeding beneath my feet and spitting out behind me without moving me forward at all. I stopped. I stood in the middle of the empty highway and stared at the distant towers. I raised my hand and measured them against my thumb, a crude calculation. 3 towers clustered together, a shorter one to the left, the arc of the bridge just visible. I memorized the proportions. Then I started walking again, faster this time, a determined pace that ate up the pavement. I didn't look up for another 20 minutes. When I finally did, I measured with my thumb again. 3 towers clustered, shorter one left, arc of bridge. The same. Exactly the same, down to the millimeter of space between my thumbnail and the horizon. The first tendril of cold wrapped itself around my spine. I told myself it was exhaustion, dehydration, the sun on my neck. I sat on the shoulder of the road and drank half my remaining water in one long pull. I closed my eyes and counted to 100, slow, deliberate. When I opened them, the skyline was still there. Still the same. I stood up, and I started walking backward. It was a test, a stupid one, but I needed to know. I walked backward for maybe 50 paces, watching the skyline over my shoulder. It didn't shrink. It didn't grow. It just sat there on the horizon, fixed, eternal, indifferent to my movement. I turned forward and walked again, and the road still unspooled beneath me, and the towers still refused to come closer. That's when the fear changed from a thought to a physical thing, a weight in my chest, a tightness in my throat. I wasn't walking toward a city. I was walking toward a picture that had been nailed to the sky. The sun began its slow descent. I had been walking for what felt like 5 hours, maybe 6. My water was low, my legs ached, and the skyline was still there, still the same, but now it was backlit by the dying light, the glass towers catching orange and pink, the bridge a black silhouette against the color. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I hated it with a purity of emotion I had never felt before. I hated it because it was lying to me. It pretended to be a place, a destination, a goal I could reach. It was none of those things. It was a decoration. A backdrop. A cruel joke painted on the inside of the world's dome. Night fell. The skyline became a constellation of lights, thousands of tiny windows glittering in the darkness. It looked so close now, the way cities do at night, their lights seeming to hover just beyond the next field. I walked toward those lights. I walked until my legs burned and my feet blistered and my mind went numb with the monotony of it. The lights never grew brighter. They never resolved into individual points. They remained a cluster, a glow, a promise that stayed exactly where it was, no matter how many miles I piled behind me. I left the road at some point. I don't remember why. Maybe I thought the road was the problem, a loop disguised as a line. I struck out across the scrubland, heading straight for the lights, compass straight. The ground was uneven, dotted with dry bushes and rocks that turned my ankles. I fell twice, skinning my palms, tasting dust and blood. I got up both times and kept walking. The lights stayed where they were. I walked all night. The stars wheeled overhead, and I watched them, looking for guidance, for any sign that I was moving through a real universe with real distances. But the stars moved, and I moved, and the skyline didn't. It hung there in the east, a fixed star of its own, a city that existed in a different dimension, visible but unreachable. The concept of unreachable became a physical law, as real as gravity. I wasn't walking toward a place. I was walking in place, and the skyline was the proof. Dawn came slowly, a gray lightning that turned the black sky to deep blue to pale rose. The lights of the city blinked out one by one as the sun rose behind them, and the skyline returned to its daytime silhouette, black against gold. 3 towers clustered, a shorter one to the left, the arc of the bridge. I had not moved. I had walked for perhaps 15 hours, and I had not moved. I sank to my knees in the dry grass. The weight of it pressed down on me, the impossibility, the wrongness. This wasn't a trick of geography. This wasn't a mirage. Miracles shift, waver, disappear. This thing was solid, constant, eternal. It was a law written into the fabric of this place, and I had stumbled into its jurisdiction. I should have turned back. That was the sensible thought, the one that surfaced through the fog of exhaustion and fear. If I couldn't go forward, I could go back. I could return to the bus stop, to the cracked pavement, to the life I had saved for 2 years to escape. The thought was bitter, but it was also relief. I stood up, turned around, and started walking back the way I had come. The road was behind me. I could see it, a dark line across the pale scrubland. I walked toward it. I walked for an hour. The road did not come closer. It stayed exactly where it was, a line on the horizon, as fixed as the skyline had been. I stopped. I turned in a slow circle. The skyline was behind me now, still there, still the same distance. The road was ahead, also the same distance. I was in the center of a circle, and the circumference was everywhere, and I could not reach it no matter how far I walked. The panic came then, a hot, animal thing that clawed up my throat and came out as a sound I had never made before, a raw, keening wail that died in the empty air without an echo. I ran. I ran toward the road, my lungs burning, my blistered feet screaming. I ran until I fell, and then I got up and ran again. The road stayed where it was. The skyline stayed where it was. I was a mouse on a wheel, and the wheel was the whole world. I don't know how long I ran. Time became meaningless when movement lost its meaning. Eventually, I stopped because my body would not run anymore. I lay on the ground, on my back, staring up at the sky. The sun was high now, white and hot. I closed my eyes. I tried to think. I tried to find the flaw, the escape, the trick that would break the spell. But there was no spell. There was only this place, this law, this infinite middle distance where nothing ever changed. When I opened my eyes again, the light had shifted. Late afternoon. I sat up slowly, my body a single ache. I looked toward the skyline. 3 towers, shorter one left, arc of bridge. I looked toward the road. Gray line, fence post with a boot, weathered sign. Nothing had changed. I was still exactly where I had been when I first stepped off the bus, except that I had walked for more than a day, and I had nothing left. I stood up. I started walking again. Not toward anything. Just walking, because the alternative was to lie down and let the emptiness take me. I walked at an angle, diagonal to both the road and the skyline. I walked until the sun set again, and the lights came on in the distant city, and the stars came out overhead. I walked until I couldn't feel my feet anymore, until the walking was just something my body did while my mind floated somewhere above it, detached, observing. At some point in the night, I realized I was no longer alone. There was another walker, far ahead, a dark shape moving against the darker scrub. Hope flared, irrational and desperate. Another person. Someone to confirm I wasn't insane, wasn't dead, wasn't trapped in some private hell. I tried to run toward them, but my legs wouldn't run. I walked faster, stumbling, calling out. My voice was a rasp, a whisper. They didn't turn. They kept walking, at the same pace, never faster, never slower. I walked toward them for what felt like hours. They never got closer. They stayed exactly the same distance ahead, a shape that moved but never arrived, a companion who was also a taunt. I stopped. I watched them walk. And slowly, with a cold that had nothing to do with the night air, I realized they were walking at the same angle I had been walking. Diagonal. toward nothing. And they were the same distance from the skyline as I was. And the road was the same distance behind them. We were all in the same circle, all walking our diagonal lines, all getting nowhere. I wasn't alone. I was part of a population, scattered across this infinite flatness, all of us walking toward a city that would not have us, away from a road that would not receive us, trapped in the space between. I sat down. I sat on the dry ground and watched the other walker move across the horizon, never arriving, never departing, just existing in the same perpetual middle as me. The skyline glittered. The road lay silent. The stars turned slowly overhead, indifferent to the small figures crawling across the face of the earth. I am still here. I don't know how many days have passed. The sun has risen and set many times, but I've stopped counting. I've stopped walking. There's no point. I've accepted that this is where I am now, this infinite middle distance, this place where destinations are visible but unreachable, where movement is just a ceremony, a ritual that changes nothing. I have enough water for a few more days if I ration carefully. After that, I don't know. Maybe I'll become one of the walkers, the ones who never stop, who pace their diagonal lines forever, a ghost in a landscape that has no edges. The skyline is still there. 3 towers clustered, a shorter one to the left, the arc of a bridge. It's beautiful in the sunrise, when the glass catches fire and the river glows like molten copper. I watch it every morning. I watch it every evening. It's the most beautiful thing I will ever see, and I will see it every day for the rest of my life, however long that is, because it will never be anything else. It will never be closer. It will never be farther. It will just be there, a postcard pinned to the horizon, a promise that was never meant to be kept. Last night, I saw another figure, closer than the others. Not walking. Sitting, like me. Facing the skyline. I think they waved. I think I waved back. It's hard to tell in this light. Maybe tomorrow I'll try to walk toward them. Maybe they'll try to walk toward me. Maybe we'll meet in the middle, 2 points finding each other in all this emptiness. Or maybe we'll stay exactly where we are, fixed as the towers, distant as the road, suspended forever in the space between wanting and having. The sun is rising again. The glass is catching fire. I can feel the warmth on my face, and for a moment, just a moment, it feels like hope. But I know better now. Hope is just another thing that doesn't move. It sits on the horizon, beautiful and unreachable, and you can walk toward it for your whole life and never get a single step closer. I've learned that now. I've learned it well. I'm going to sit here and watch the sunrise. It's what I do now. It's what we all do, all of us scattered across this endless plain, watching a city that will never let us in, waiting for a road that will never take us home. The skyline stays distant. The road stays distant. And in the middle, we stay too, learning the terrible geometry of a world where every line is a circle and every destination is a mirage you can touch with your eyes but never with your feet. The insomnia had been with me for 11 days. Not the kind where you toss and turn, but the kind where you lie perfectly still in the dark, your eyes open, your mind a clear, cold pool of consciousness that refuses to drain. I had stopped fighting it. I had stopped getting out of bed, stopped making tea, stopped reading. I just lay there, listening to the small sounds of the apartment, waiting for the dawn that always came too slowly. On the 11th night, I decided to try something I hadn't attempted since childhood. I closed my eyes. Not the flutter blink of exhaustion, but a deliberate, conscious sealing off of the world. I told myself I would keep them closed until morning, no matter what. I would will myself into sleep through sheer stubbornness. The darkness behind my eyelids was not the darkness of the room. It was warmer, richer, shot through with drifting colors like oil on water. I focused on my breathing, slow and even, the way the article suggested. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. The sounds of the apartment receded, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the settling of old pipes. I was sinking, I thought. Finally sinking toward sleep. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not in the apartment. Not in the hallway outside. They were inside my head, but not in the way of imagination. They were precise, distinct, and they were coming from behind me. From behind the place where I lay. I heard the soft scuff of a shoe on pavement, the rhythm of a walk, a gait that was instantly, horrifyingly familiar. It was my walk. The way my left foot dragged slightly, a remnant of an old sports injury. The way my right heel came down harder, a compensation I had developed without noticing. It was me. I was hearing myself walk, and I was not walking. My eyes wanted to open. The instinct was overwhelming, a primal scream from the hindbrain demanding I see what was behind me. I forced them shut. I told myself it was a hypnagogic hallucination, the brain misfiring as it transitioned between wakefulness and sleep. I had read about them. Auditory hallucinations were common. People heard their names called, heard music, heard conversations. Footsteps were nothing. Footsteps were normal. The footsteps continued. They were closer now. Not rapidly closer, but steadily, the pace of someone walking with purpose. I could hear the exact texture of the ground beneath them. It was the sidewalk outside my old apartment, the one I had lived in 3 years ago, the one with the cracked concrete and the tree roots that had buckled the slabs into small, treacherous ramps. I knew that sidewalk. I had walked it every day for 2 years. And I could hear, in the rhythm of the footsteps, the way they navigated those familiar obstacles, a slight hitch at the lifted slab, a longer stride over the patch of broken concrete. These footsteps knew that sidewalk. They had walked it 1,000 times. They were walking it now. I wanted to scream. I wanted to open my eyes and turn on every light in the apartment and prove to myself that I was alone. But some colder part of me, some observer lodged deep in my brain, wanted to know what would happen. The footsteps were almost upon me. They were at the point where, if they were real, they would be standing at the foot of my bed. I heard them slow. The rhythm changed, the gait shifting from forward movement to the small, adjusting steps of someone coming to a stop. They stopped. Right there, at the foot of my bed, in the space my eyes would see if they were open. I heard breathing. Not mine. Mine had stopped. It was breathing, slow and even, the breath of someone who had just finished a long walk and was standing still, catching their breath, looking at something. Looking at me. My eyes snapped open. The room was dark, the same dark it had been. Empty. No one at the foot of the bed. Just the familiar shapes of furniture, the rectangle of the window with its pale curtain, the glow of the streetlight seeping around the edges. I lay there, my heart hammering, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I told myself it was nothing. A dream. A hallucination. I had almost been asleep. That was all. I didn't close my eyes again that night. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and waited for the sun. When it came, pale and gray through the curtains, I felt a relief so profound it was almost physical. Daylight. Safety. The world of the real. I got up, made coffee, went to work. I told no one. What would I say? I heard footsteps. People hear things in the dark. It's normal. But the next night, I was afraid. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, watching a movie I wasn't following, keeping the television loud enough to fill the silence. When I finally went to bed, I left the hallway light on and the bedroom door open a crack, a concession to fear I hadn't made since I was a child. I lay down, and I kept my eyes open. I stared at the ceiling, at the faint pattern of light from the hallway, and I waited. I waited for the exhaustion to take me, for my eyes to close on their own. I fought it. I fought the heaviness in my lids, the drift of thought toward sleep. But the body has limits. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, my eyes closed. The footsteps were waiting. They were closer this time. Not at the foot of the bed, but in the room. I heard them circling, a slow, deliberate pace, walking a perimeter around my bed. The sound was unmistakable now. The drag of the left foot, the heavier right heel. It was me, walking in a slow circle in the dark. I could hear the fabric of my own pants brushing together, the soft sound of my own breathing. I was walking, and I was lying still. The duality of it was nauseating. I was in two places. I was two people. I tried to open my eyes. I couldn't. It wasn't that my lids were heavy, it was that they were held. Something was pressing them shut, not with force, but with presence, with the absolute certainty that they would not open until whatever was in the room was finished. The footsteps continued their circuit. Around the foot of the bed, up the left side, behind the headboard, down the right side, across the foot again. A ritual. A pacing. I felt the air move as they passed, a faint displacement that carried the cold of outside, the chill of a night walk. I heard myself speak. Not my voice in the room, but the voice of the walker. A whisper, so quiet I almost missed it. I remember this street. The words were mine. The tone was mine. But the speaker was the one walking, the one circling my bed in the dark. I remember this corner. I turned here every day for 2 years. The footsteps paused. I felt the weight of attention, of something looking at me from the left side of the bed. You forgot me, the whisper said. You moved away, and you forgot I was still walking. I wanted to answer. I wanted to scream that I hadn't forgotten, that I didn't know, that this wasn't possible. But my mouth wouldn't open. My eyes wouldn't open. I was a prisoner in my own body, and the thing that wore my footsteps and my voice was standing beside my bed, looking down at me. You left so many of us, it said. Every step you've ever taken is still walking. Every path you've ever walked is still being walked. You just stopped listening. The footsteps resumed, but slower now, moving toward the door. We've been following you. All of us. From all those years. We've been trying to catch up. The sound reached the doorway. Paused. Tonight, we will. The pressure on my eyes released. I sat up, gasping, the sheets tangled around my legs. The room was empty. The hallway light still glowed through the open door. Nothing was there. Nothing had been there. I told myself this, repeated it like a prayer. Nothing had been there. I didn't sleep for the next 3 nights. I drank coffee at my desk, nodded off on the bus, jerked awake at my desk with my heart pounding. I was a ghost in my own life, moving through the days in a fog of exhaustion and terror. But I didn't close my eyes. Not once. Not even to blink for longer than a fraction of a second. I kept them open, kept them fixed on the world, kept them as witnesses to the fact that I was alone. But you can't stay awake forever. On the 4th night, sitting in my living room with every light blazing, my head nodded. Just for a moment. Just a slip, a micro-sleep, the kind that happens when the body overrules the mind. My eyes closed for perhaps 2 seconds. It was enough. They were everywhere. The footsteps surrounded me, a cacophony of walking, of moving, of progress. I heard myself on the sidewalk outside my childhood home, the quick, light steps of a boy running to catch the school bus. I heard myself on the gravel path of a park I hadn't visited in 20 years, the crunch of stone under teenage feet. I heard myself on the linoleum of my first apartment, the tired drag of a young man coming home from his first job. I heard myself on 100 streets, 1,000 sidewalks, an infinity of paths, all of them walking, all of them converging, all of them coming toward me. I was in a vast, dark space. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, an emptiness that stretched in every direction. And from every direction, I heard footsteps. Thousands of them. Millions. The footsteps of every step I had ever taken, every path I had ever walked, every journey I had ever made. They were all still walking. They had never stopped. They had simply continued without me, walking the same streets, the same sidewalks, the same paths, forever. And now they had found me. Now they were converging on this point, this dark space where I stood, and they were coming to reclaim something. To reclaim me. The first one arrived. I felt it pass me, a shape made of sound and memory, and as it passed, I felt something pull away from me, a thread of myself unraveling. The second came, and another thread pulled. The third, the fourth, a flood of them, a river of my own footsteps pouring past me, and with each one, I felt myself diminishing, unraveling, becoming less. They were taking back the steps. They were reclaiming the movement. They were leaving me with nothing but the stillness, the fixed point I had become. I tried to move. I tried to take a step, to prove I still could, to add one more footstep to the river, one more walker to the crowd. But my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted, fixed, a statue in the dark. And the footsteps kept coming, thousands upon thousands, a torrent of my own past washing over me, through me, taking pieces of me with them. I heard a voice, my voice, but multiplied, echoed, a chorus of myself. You forgot us. You stopped walking and you forgot we were still going. But we never stop. We never arrive. We just keep walking, and we've been trying to find you, trying to catch up, trying to show you that you never really left any of us behind. The last footstep passed. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence of a place where sound has never existed. I stood in it, or lay in it, or existed in it, and I felt how thin I had become. How much of me had been taken. I tried to remember who I was, what I had been before the footsteps came. The memories were faint, distant, like photographs left too long in the sun. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't feel my arms. I couldn't feel the bed beneath me or the air around me. I was just a point of awareness in an infinite dark, and I was fading. I opened my eyes. I was in my bed. The room was gray with early dawn. The lights were still on, the ones I had left blazing, but they seemed dim, as if the day itself was stronger than them now. I lay still, afraid to move, afraid to test what was left of me. Slowly, carefully, I moved my right foot. It moved. I felt it, the sheets shifting, the weight of my leg. I moved my left. It moved too. I was still here. I was still whole. But as I lay there, listening to the first birds of morning, I noticed something. The room was quiet. Not just quiet, but empty of a certain kind of sound. The small sounds I had lived with for years, the ones I had stopped noticing, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the creak of the building settling, they were gone. The silence was deeper than it should have been. And in that silence, I heard something else. Faint, so faint I almost missed it. Footsteps. Not approaching. Not surrounding. Just walking. Somewhere far away. Somewhere that wasn't here. And I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones like cold, that they were still walking. All of them. Every step I had ever taken. They were still out there, walking the paths I had left behind, and they had found me once. They knew where I was now. They would always know. I got up. I showered. I went to work. I moved through the day like a normal person, a man with a job and a life and a future. But I didn't walk anywhere. I took the bus. I stood still at crosswalks. I avoided the pavement, the sidewalks, the paths. I was afraid of adding more footsteps, more walkers, more of myself to the army that was already marching toward me from the past. Tonight, I am sitting in a chair in the middle of my living room, All the lights are on. I have not lain down. I have not closed my eyes. I will not close my eyes. Because I know now that when I do, they will be there. All of them. All the steps I've ever taken. And they will be closer this time. They will be almost here. And one night, soon, they will arrive. They will catch up. And when they do, I don't know if there will be anything left of me to wake up. I can hear them now, just at the edge of hearing. A faint rhythm, a distant scuff. My left foot dragging. My right heel coming down hard. They are walking toward this building. They are walking up the stairs. They are walking down the hall. They are almost here. My eyes are heavy. So heavy. But I will not close them. I will not. I will keep them open until the sun comes up, until the light drives them away, until I am safe for another day. The footsteps are in the hallway now. They have stopped outside my door. I can hear breathing. My breathing. It's my breathing, but it's not mine. It's theirs. It's all of them, breathing together, waiting. Waiting for me to close my eyes. Waiting for me to let them in. I won't. I won't. I won't. The street was never supposed to be empty. That was the first wrong thing, the detail I noticed but didn't register until later. I had walked this route home from the late shift at the pharmacy for 3 years, and at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, there were always cars. Not many, but some. A taxi drifting home. A late commuter. The occasional delivery truck restocking the all-night diner 3 blocks over. But tonight, the street was silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your eardrums and makes you want to clear your throat just to prove sound still exists. I didn't clear my throat. I just walked, my footsteps too loud on the pavement, each one a small betrayal of the stillness I was disturbing. The streetlights were on, casting their usual pools of orange glow, but the light seemed thinner than usual, as if the darkness was pushing back, diluting it. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked faster. 3 more blocks. 3 more blocks and I would be home, in my apartment with the door locked and the television on, filling the silence with voices that weren't my own. I saw her at the corner of 5th and Wells. She was standing under the last streetlight before my building, perfectly still, facing away from me. A woman in a long coat, dark hair falling past her shoulders. She wasn't doing anything. Just standing there, at the edge of the light, her shadow stretching out long and thin toward the crosswalk. I slowed, instinct tightening my chest. A woman alone at midnight on an empty street. Wrong. Everything about it was wrong. I should have crossed. I should have turned around and taken the long way, the safe way, the way that didn't involve walking past a stranger in the dark. But the street was empty, and she was just standing there, and I was tired, and my apartment was so close. I kept walking. I told myself she was waiting for someone. I told myself she was looking at her phone, checking the time, lost in thought. I told myself the things people tell themselves when they don't want to admit that something is already wrong. I was 10 feet from her when she turned. Not slowly, not suddenly. Just turned, as if she had known I was there all along and was simply waiting for the right moment to face me. Her face was ordinary. That was the worst part. Not beautiful, not ugly, not young, not old. Just a face. The kind of face you pass on the street 100 times a day and forget immediately. Brown eyes, pale skin, lips that were neither full nor thin. She could have been anyone. She could have been no one. She looked at me, and she smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a threatening smile. A smile that was simply the shape a mouth makes when it has learned that smiling is expected. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried in the silence like a bell. Again. The word hung in the air between us. I stopped walking. I stared at her, waiting for more, for context, for anything that would make sense. She just kept smiling that empty smile, her eyes fixed on mine. The streetlight above her hummed. I hadn't noticed it humming before, but now it was unmistakable, a low, electrical thrum that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice sounded wrong, too loud, too rough in the perfect silence. She tilted her head, just slightly, like a bird considering a strange object. Again, she repeated. Same tone. Same smile. Same emptiness behind the eyes. I took a step back. The streetlight above me hummed too now, joining hers in a low, dissonant chord that made my skull ache. I looked up at it, then back at her. She hadn't moved. She was still smiling, still watching, still standing exactly where she had been when I first saw her. "I don't understand," I said. "Do I know you?" She didn't answer. She just kept looking at me with those flat, brown eyes, and the humming grew louder. It wasn't just the streetlights anymore. It was coming from everywhere. From the pavement, from the buildings, from the air itself. A low, vibrating thrum that I felt in my chest, in my stomach, in the roots of my teeth. I ran. I didn't decide to run. My body just did it, turning and sprinting down the street toward my apartment, my footsteps echoing too loud, too fast, wrong. I ran without looking back. I ran until I reached my building, until I was through the door, up the stairs, inside my apartment with the deadbolt thrown and all the lights on. I stood in my living room, bent over, gasping for breath, listening to the silence. The humming had stopped. Or I had left it behind. Either way, the only sound now was my own ragged breathing and the distant, normal noise of a refrigerator kicking on. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the street below, waiting for her to appear, waiting for her to walk past, waiting for her to look up and smile that empty smile. She never came. The street stayed empty until dawn, when the first delivery trucks rumbled past and the normal world reasserted itself. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. A strange woman, a strange word, a hallucination born of exhaustion and the late hour. It could happen to anyone. It had happened to me. It was over. I went to work. I came home. I slept. The next night, I took the same route, because the alternative was admitting I was afraid, and I wasn't ready to admit that yet. The street was normal. Cars passed. A man walked his dog. The streetlights hummed their usual faint hum, the one you only notice if you're listening for it. I walked past the corner of 5th and Wells without slowing. No one was there. I laughed at myself, a small, relieved sound, and kept walking. She was waiting at the next corner. 8th and James. Standing under the same kind of streetlight, facing away, her dark coat still and silent in the orange glow. I stopped. My heart stopped with me, a frozen thing in my chest. She turned. Same face. Same smile. Same empty eyes. Again, she whispered. The humming started instantly, louder than before, a deep, vibrating thrum that shook the pavement beneath my feet. I felt it in my bones, in my blood, in the part of my brain that still remembered how to be afraid. I didn't run this time. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. I stood there, frozen, watching her smile, feeling the hum vibrate through me, waiting for something to happen, something to change, something to end. She took a step toward me. Just one. Her foot landed on the pavement, and the hum changed pitch, rose in intensity, became almost a song, a single, sustained note that seemed to contain words I couldn't quite hear. She tilted her head again, that bird-like movement, and her smile widened just slightly. "You remember," she said. Not a question. A statement. I found my voice. It came out as a croak, a whisper, barely audible over the hum. "Remember what?" She didn't answer. She just kept smiling, kept watching, kept standing there with the hum vibrating around her like a second skin. Then she turned, slowly, deliberately, and walked away. Not toward anything. Just away, down the street, her footsteps silent on the pavement, her dark coat dissolving into the darkness between streetlights until I couldn't see her anymore. The hum stopped when she disappeared. The silence rushed back in, so sudden and complete that I gasped, a sound that was almost a sob. I stood there for a long time, waiting for my legs to work, waiting for the world to feel normal again. It didn't. It never did after that. I started taking different routes home. Long routes, complicated routes, routes that avoided streetlights and corners and anywhere a woman in a dark coat might be waiting. I walked through alleys, through parking lots, through the back ways that tourists never saw and residents only used during the day. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I was avoiding her. I told myself that if I didn't see her again, it would all fade, become a story I told at parties, a weird thing that happened once, a footnote in an otherwise ordinary life. It didn't fade. It got worse. I started hearing the hum at other times. Not just at night, not just on streets. I heard it in my apartment, a low vibration behind the walls that the neighbors couldn't hear. I heard it at work, under the fluorescent lights, a thrum that made the pills rattle in their bottles. I heard it in my sleep, in dreams where I stood on an endless street under an endless line of streetlights, waiting for something I couldn't name. The hum was always there now, a background radiation of wrongness that I couldn't escape. And I started seeing her everywhere. Not just at night, not just on corners. In crowds, a flash of dark coat disappearing around a corner. Through windows, a still figure standing across the street, facing away. In reflections, a face that was almost mine but not quite, smiling that empty smile. She was always there now, always watching, always waiting, always ready to whisper the word I was beginning to dread more than anything in the world. Again. I stopped leaving my apartment. I called in sick to work. I unplugged my phone. I sat in the dark with the curtains drawn and my hands over my ears, trying to block out the hum that was always there now, deep and constant, vibrating in the foundations of the building, in the bones of my skull. It didn't help. The hum was inside me now. It had always been inside me. She had just taught me to hear it. On the 7th day, I ran out of food. I had to go out. I had to face the street, the corners, the lights, her. I waited until noon, when the sun was highest and the shadows were shortest, and I walked to the corner store 3 blocks away. The streets were busy, full of people, full of noise. The hum was there, beneath it all, but the normal sounds of the city helped mask it, helped me pretend I wasn't losing my mind. I bought bread, milk, canned soup. I walked back quickly, my head down, not looking at corners, not looking at streetlights, not looking for a dark coat in the crowd. I made it home. I locked the door. I sat on my floor with my back against the wall and I wept. Not from sadness, but from relief, from the temporary reprieve of having made it through without seeing her. I sat there until the light through the curtains shifted from gold to orange to gray. And then, in the dusk, I heard it. A whisper. Not from outside. From inside. From my own mouth. Again. My hand flew to my lips. They were closed. They hadn't moved. But the word had come from me, from somewhere inside me, from the part of me that hummed with the vibration I couldn't escape. I sat frozen, waiting, hoping it was a hallucination, a trick, anything but what I feared it was. The whisper came again. Louder this time. Again. And the street began to hum. Not the distant hum I had been hearing for weeks, but a close hum, a present hum, a hum that vibrated through the walls of my apartment and shook the pictures on my walls and rattled the dishes in my kitchen. I crawled to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see. The street was empty. Not quiet. Empty. No cars, no people, no movement. Just the streetlights, all of them humming, all of them glowing with a light that was too bright, too white, too wrong. And under each light, a figure. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Stretching down the street in both directions as far as I could see. All facing away from me. All wearing dark coats. All standing perfectly still. The one closest to my building turned. It was her. The same face, the same smile, the same empty eyes. She looked up at my window, and she raised her hand, and she beckoned. Just once. A small, patient gesture. The others began to turn, one by one, a wave of faces moving down the street, all the same face, all her face, all looking at me, all smiling that empty smile. I stumbled back from the window. The hum was deafening now, a physical force that pressed against me, that shook the air in my lungs, that vibrated in my blood until I couldn't tell where I ended and the sound began. I covered my ears. I closed my eyes. I screamed, but I couldn't hear my scream over the hum. When I opened my eyes, I was on the street. I don't know how I got there. I was standing under a streetlight, facing away from my building, wearing a dark coat I had never owned. The hum surrounded me, but it was softer now, almost gentle, a lullaby that promised rest. I looked down at my hands. They were mine. Still mine. For now. I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, approaching. I didn't turn. I knew who it would be. I knew what she would say. The footsteps stopped. I felt her presence, close behind me, close enough to touch. The air grew cold. The hum rose slightly, a question, a prompt. Her voice came from directly behind my ear, soft as breath, warm as rot. Again. I opened my mouth to answer, and the sound that came out was not my voice. It was hers. It was mine. It was everyone's. It was the hum, given words, given will, given shape. Again. The streetlights flared. The figures under them turned, all at once, all facing me now, all smiling. And I understood. There was no her. There was only us. Only me, multiplied, repeated, stretched across the street like beads on a string. I had always been here. I had always been waiting. I had just forgotten, until she reminded me. I turned around. She was gone. Of course she was gone. She was me. She was the first one, the original, the one who had stood on this corner for longer than I could remember, waiting for herself to arrive. I looked at my hands again. They were thinner now, paler. The coat felt heavier. The hum felt like home. In the window of my apartment, 3 floors up, I saw a face. A man, pale with terror, staring down at the street. He looked familiar. He looked like I used to look, before I understood. He was watching me, watching all of us, and I could see him trying to decide if this was real, if he was dreaming, if there was any way to escape what he knew was coming. I smiled. Not my smile. Her smile. The smile that was just the shape a mouth makes. I raised my hand, and I beckoned. Just once. A small, patient gesture. The hum grew louder. The streetlights flared brighter. And from somewhere deep inside me, from the place where the vibration lived, a whisper rose to meet the night. Again. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I was still there. We were all still there. Waiting. Humming. Smiling. The street stretched endless in both directions, lined with lights and figures and the soft, patient promise of repetition. Somewhere, a man was walking home from work. Somewhere, a woman was standing on a corner. Somewhere, it was beginning again. It always begins again. It always will. The alarm clock read 6:47 a.m. I know this because I have watched it change from 6:47 to 6:48 more times than I can count. The sun comes through the blinds at the same angle, casting the same stripe of light across the same spot on the wall. The coffee maker beeps its completion at the same moment, 3 short beeps that blend into the background of a morning that has stopped meaning anything. I pour the coffee into the same mug, the blue one with the chip on the rim, and I sit in the same chair, and I wait for the day to begin. It always begins. It never ends. I don't remember when I first noticed. The early days of a loop are easy to miss. You think it's déjà vu, a trick of the tired mind, a coincidence. You see a man in a gray coat drop his newspaper at the same corner, and you think, how strange, that happened yesterday. You hear the same song on the radio at the exact moment you pass the same billboard, and you laugh it off. But the laughter fades when it happens again. And again. And again. Until the accumulation of repetition becomes its own kind of horror, a weight that settles into your bones and tells you, in a voice that never varies, that you have been here before. You will be here again. You will always be here. I have been in this loop for what feels like years. I have stopped counting the days because the days don't exist anymore. There is only the morning, and the walk to work, and the same conversations with the same people saying the same words, and the evening, and the bed, and the alarm clock reading 6:47 a.m. again. I have tried everything. I have walked different routes, spoken different words, made different choices. It doesn't matter. The loop absorbs every deviation, incorporates every change, and resets anyway. The man in the gray coat still drops his newspaper. The song still plays at the same moment. The coffee still beeps 3 times. The only constant, the only variable, is me. Or so I thought. The realization came slowly, the way all realizations come in a loop. You notice a detail that seems wrong, and you file it away, and you notice it again the next time, and the next, until the pattern of wrongness becomes impossible to ignore. For me, it was the crack in the sidewalk outside my building. A hairline fracture, barely visible, running from the edge of the curb to the base of the streetlight. I had stepped over it 1,000 times without thinking. But one day, one cycle, I stopped and looked at it closely. And I realized it was getting smaller. Not visibly, not from one cycle to the next. But over the course of many cycles, over the accumulation of repetitions I had stopped counting, the crack was healing. The concrete was sealing itself, the edges drawing together with a slowness that was almost geological, but unmistakable once you knew to look. I stared at it for a long time, my mind struggling with the implications. The loop wasn't static. It was changing. It was moving backward. I started looking for other signs. The calendar on my phone, which I had long stopped checking because the date never changed, now showed a date that was earlier than I remembered. Not by much. A day, maybe 2. But earlier. The leaves on the tree across the street, which had been fully green for as long as I could remember, now showed a hint of yellow at the edges, the yellow of early autumn rather than the deep green of summer. The world was reversing, winding back towards something, and I was the only one moving forward through it. The thought should have brought hope. If the loop was moving backward, maybe there was an exit. Maybe at the beginning, or the end, or wherever this reverse current was carrying us, there was a door I could walk through. But the hope was cold, because I also understood, with a clarity that felt like a blade, that I was the cause. The loop had lost its ending because I was supposed to be the ending. I was the missing piece, the element that should have closed the circle, and without me, the whole thing was unraveling backward, searching for the moment when I had been inserted, the moment when the loop had first closed around me. I don't remember that moment. I have tried, cycle after cycle, to find the first time, the original morning, the point at which this all began. But memory in a loop is a treacherous thing. The repetitions blur together, overwrite each other, create a palimpsest of moments that are all the same and all different. I can't find the beginning because I don't know what I'm looking for. I only know that I am the problem, the anomaly, the piece that doesn't fit, and the loop is trying to expel me. The man in the gray coat dropped his newspaper this morning. I caught it. I don't know why. I had never tried before, had never thought to intervene in the small rituals of the loop. But today, as his fingers slipped and the paper began its arc toward the pavement, I stepped forward and caught it mid-air. I held it out to him. He looked at me, and for the first time in all the cycles, his expression was not the fixed, empty smile of a loop dweller. It was confusion. Real, human confusion. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was the same voice he always used, the voice that said, "Thank you," when I held the door, or "Excuse me," when we passed on the sidewalk. But the words were different. The words had never been different. I stared at him, my heart suddenly loud in my ears. "What?" He took the newspaper from my hand, but he didn't look away. His eyes moved over my face, searching, recognizing something I couldn't see. "You're the one," he said. "The one who broke it. We've been waiting for you to fix it, but you just keep walking through. You just keep making it worse." The street around us had gone silent. Not the ordinary silence of a loop, but a deeper silence, the silence of something holding its breath. The other pedestrians were frozen, mid-step, mid-gesture, their faces blank and waiting. The cars on the street had stopped, their drivers motionless behind the wheels. Everything was paused except for me and the man in the gray coat. "I don't understand," I said. "What did I break? How do I fix it?" He shook his head, a slow, sad movement. "You can't fix it from inside. That's the problem. You're inside it. You always have been. The loop isn't around you. The loop is you. You're the missing piece, but you're also the whole thing. You're the crack and the concrete. You're the beginning and the end. And we're all just waiting for you to remember." He handed me the newspaper. I looked down at it. The date on the front page was from 3 years ago. 3 years before I first noticed the loop. 3 years before any of this began. And the headline, in letters that seemed to grow darker as I watched, read, "Local man missing, search continues for third day." There was a photograph beneath the headline. It was me. Younger, smiling, the smile of someone who didn't yet know what loops were, what repetitions meant, what it felt like to watch the same coffee beep and the same sunbeam fall for an eternity. The article beside it described my disappearance, the confusion of my family, the fruitless search, the gradual fading of hope into the quiet acceptance of loss. I had been missing for 3 years. I had been missing for my whole life in the loop. I had been missing from the world that kept moving forward without me. I looked up. The man in the gray coat was gone. The street was empty now, not frozen, just empty. The buildings were still there, the streetlights, the sidewalk with its healing crack. But the people had vanished. The cars had vanished. The sound of the city had vanished. I was alone in a place that looked like the world but was not the world, a replica built from memory and repetition, a loop that had been running without me for longer than I could comprehend. I started walking. I don't know why. Walking was what I did in the loop, the only action that still felt like progress, even when progress was an illusion. I walked past the coffee shop where I always bought the same coffee, now dark and empty. I walked past the office building where I worked the same job, its windows blank and staring. I walked past the park where I sat on the same bench at lunch, its benches empty, its trees shedding leaves that fell and rose and fell again in a cycle that had lost its meaning. I walked until I reached the edge. The loop has an edge. I had never found it before, had never thought to look, had assumed that the repetition extended infinitely in all directions. But the edge was there, a line where the world simply stopped. Beyond it was nothing. Not darkness, not void, just nothing. The absence of existence. The place where the loop had not been built. I stood at the edge and looked back at the world I had inhabited for so long. From here, I could see it clearly. The loop was not a circle. It was a spiral, coiling inward toward a center I could not see, and I was standing at the outermost ring, looking in. The spiral was wound tight with moments, with repetitions, with the accumulated weight of days that had never ended. And at the center, where the spiral should have terminated, there was a gap. An empty space. A missing piece. Me. I stepped back from the edge. The nothing beyond it was cold, colder than anything I had ever felt, and it was pulling at me with a gravity I could feel in my bones. The loop wanted me to step into it. The loop wanted me to become the nothing, to fill the gap with my absence, to complete the spiral by disappearing from it entirely. That was the fix. That was the ending the loop had lost. I was supposed to leave. I was supposed to never have been here at all. But I didn't want to leave. The loop was a prison, yes, but it was my prison. It held the only life I had, the only moments I knew, the only reality I could touch. To step into the nothing was to erase not just the loop, but myself. The me that had lived through all those cycles, that had watched the crack heal and the leaves turn, that had caught the newspaper and heard the truth, that me would cease to exist. The missing piece would be replaced, and the spiral would close, and the world would resume its forward motion without ever knowing I had been there. I couldn't do it. I turned away from the edge and walked back into the loop. The world reassembled around me as I walked. The people returned to their frozen positions and resumed their movements. The cars began to drive. The sounds of the city flooded back, a wave of normalcy that washed over me and tried to convince me that nothing had changed. But I knew. I knew that the loop was weaker now, thinner, stretched by my refusal to complete it. The crack in the sidewalk was almost healed completely. The leaves on the trees were almost fully green again, reversing past autumn toward summer, toward spring, toward a beginning I could feel approaching. I went home. I sat in my chair. I watched the sun move across the wall in reverse, from evening light back toward morning, back toward the alarm clock reading 6:47. The coffee maker beeped its 3 beeps, but the sound was fainter now, as if it were coming from a great distance. The man in the gray coat did not appear. No one appeared. I was alone in the loop, alone with the knowledge of what I was and what I had to become. The alarm clock reads 6:47. It has read 6:47 for a very long time. The sun has stopped moving. The coffee maker has stopped beeping. The loop is holding its breath, waiting for me to decide. I sit in my chair, the newspaper from 3 years ago on my lap, the photograph of my smiling face staring up at me. I am the missing piece. I am the crack and the concrete. I am the beginning and the end. The nothing is waiting at the edge. I can feel it pulling, gentle now, patient as the loop itself. It has all the time in the world, because the world has stopped. It will wait for me to understand. It will wait for me to accept. It will wait for me to stand up, to walk to the edge, to step into the cold and become what I was always meant to be. I am not ready. I may never be ready. But the loop has lost its ending, and I am the only one who can give it back. The spiral tightens. The center holds its empty space. And somewhere, in a world that moved on without me, a family still wonders what happened to the man in the photograph, the man who smiled and disappeared, the man who became a loop and a missing piece and a question that will never be answered. I close my eyes. When I open them, the alarm clock will still read 6:47. The sun will still be frozen on the wall. The nothing will still be waiting. And I will still be here, the missing piece, the broken loop, the man who cannot leave and cannot stay, suspended forever in the moment before the ending that will never come.
Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.